She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply tapped her phone, then 50 people stood up, and the airline lost a six-figure flight in under a minute. That's not the opening to a novel. That's what actually happened at LAX Terminal 6, on what should have been a routine afternoon flight to Tokyo. Dr. Ayana Brooks wasn't there to cause a scene. She was there to close a $300 million deal that would change the landscape of neurological treatment forever. Her team, 40 of the brightest scientists, developers, and engineers in biotech, had spent years building something extraordinary. They were boarding that flight with purpose. But when Ayana stepped into the first-class lane, dressed in a tailored gray suit and carrying nothing more than a slim leather bag, a gate agent named Janet didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a pioneer, a Harvard medical graduate, a woman leading one of the most important biotech firms in the world. She saw a black woman who didn't look the part. Without even glancing at her ticket, Janet pointed to the economy line and said, "That line's over there, ma'am." That single gesture, subtle, dismissive, wrapped in fake politeness, ignited a silent revolution. Ayana didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand to speak to a manager. She simply stepped back, opened her phone, and with one encrypted message, rerouted an entire company's travel, sunk a day's worth of operations for the airline, and triggered a fallout that would reach all the way to the top of a billion-dollar transportation empire. But this isn't just about a cancelled flight. It's about what happens when quiet dignity meets unchecked arrogance. It's about the cost of bias, the ripple of one small injustice, and the strength it takes to walk away. Not just in protest, but in principle. So if you've ever wondered how one calm, deliberate action can shake an entire system, stay with this story. It's not just a power move, it's a masterclass in leadership. And hey, if this already has you leaning in, hit like. You're going to want to see how it ends. Dr. Ayana Brooks wasn't born into power. She earned it, inch by inch, setback by setback, brilliance by brilliance. At 39, she stood at the helm of Nova Biomex, one of the fastest-growing biotech firms in North America. Her name was beginning to appear on the same lists as Musk and Kozla, not for launching rockets or startups, but for something far more personal: hope. Nova Biomex specialized in synthetic microbial therapies, engineered microorganisms that could repair damaged neural tissue. Their breakthrough research was already changing how doctors approached conditions like early-stage Parkinson's, degenerative neural disorders, and trauma-induced motor loss. In simpler terms, Ayana's work was giving people back their lives, one cell at a time. Her background was as rare as her success. Raised in Atlanta by a single mother who worked nights as a nurse, Ayana learned early on what persistence looked like. Her mother didn't have time for excuses, only results. Ayana carried that mindset into every classroom, every lab, every boardroom she ever walked into. She earned her MD and PhD in neuroscience from Harvard Medical School, simultaneously. Not because she wanted the accolades, but because she couldn't stand watching patients suffer without solutions. She didn't just want to diagnose diseases. She wanted to dismantle them. Her professors called her intense. Her classmates called her intimidating. But those closest to her knew the truth. Ayana wasn't cold, she was focused. Laser-focused. She believed time was a currency too precious to waste on comfort zones or meaningless pleasantries. And people followed her, not because she demanded loyalty, but because she inspired it. Standing 5'7", with a sculpted frame earned from boxing at 5 a.m. and yoga at sunset, Ayana was a portrait of control. Her skin was deep bronze, glowing against the muted palette of her business attire. Her hair was always tied back into a neat low bun. Her eyes, framed by sleek tortoiseshell glasses, missed nothing. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. Ayana had been called many things: brilliant, tough, uncompromising, but never soft. Not until recently, when she started speaking more about access, about building not just technology but trust. She wasn't interested in being the only black woman in the room anymore. She was building spaces where she'd never have to be. And that day, at Terminal 6, she was leading 40 people to Tokyo, not just to close a deal, but to make history. For Dr. Ayana Brooks and the team at Nova Biomex, this wasn't just another international business trip. This was the culmination of 4 years of research, testing, and sleepless nights. The destination was Tokyo, but the real goal was something far greater: a signature. They were headed to finalize a strategic partnership with the Yamanaka Institute for Regenerative Medicine, one of Japan's most respected biotech powerhouses. Together, they were preparing to launch a new treatment for Parkinson's disease, one that could change the global standard of care. Nova Biomex had developed the synthetic microbial technology, and Yamanaka had the clinical infrastructure and regulatory muscle to bring it to scale across Asia. The deal was massive, valued at over $300 million, but its weight couldn't be measured in money alone. This partnership would open doors to new global trials, accelerate FDA fast-track approval in the United States, and place Nova Biomex at the forefront of neurobiological therapeutics. For Ayana, it wasn't just about science or business. It was about impact. The Tokyo meeting had been scheduled down to the minute. 2 days of presentations, lab demonstrations, and final contract negotiations. Then, on the third day, the signing ceremony. A room full of cameras, journalists, investors, and policymakers. Ayana was set to speak, not just as CEO, but as a symbol of what visionary black leadership could look like in an industry that had, for too long, shut its doors to people like her. That morning at LAX, the team had arrived early. 40 top-level employees, project leads, senior biochemists, legal counsel, logistics managers. Ayana made it clear from day one, if you're traveling on mission-critical business, you don't fly coach. Everyone was booked in business or first class. It wasn't a perk, it was a standard. Comfort on long-haul flights wasn't about luxury. It was about keeping your mind sharp, your body functioning, and your team focused. She had learned that lesson the hard way in her early days, traveling on red ice with swollen feet and no sleep, expected to give billion-dollar pitches after a 7-hour flight. Never again. So now, every detail was handled. Boarding passes distributed. Luggage checked. Visas approved. Hotels coordinated. A private team lounge near Gate 64 had been reserved for last-minute briefings. Everything was running like clockwork. Until one careless moment, one dismissive voice, tried to dismantle it all. At Gate 64, the pre-boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. First-class passengers and Platinum Priority members for Flight 198 to Tokyo, you may now board through the priority lane. Dr. Ayana Brooks stood, straightened her jacket, and nodded gently to her Chief Operating Officer, Marcus Hill, seated a few rows away. Around them, the Nova Biomex team began to move in quiet, purposeful waves. A few pulled laptops from their bags, others finished calls or zipped carry-outs. They were a well-oiled machine. Focused. Professional. Ready. Ayana walked toward the boarding gate, her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. She moved with the kind of confidence that turns heads. Measured, poised, intentional. She wasn't rushing. She didn't have to. Her name was printed on seat 1A. Behind the desk stood 2 airline agents. One was a young man with a friendly face and a quick hand at scanning barcodes. The other, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly pressed navy slacks, a silver nameplate that read, Janet Reynolds, and the expression of someone who had been doing this job for a long time, and had stopped enjoying it a while ago. Janet glanced up, barely. Her eyes moved past Ayana's outfit, past the carry-on, past even the confidence, and landed on one thing, Ayana's skin. Without a smile, without a greeting, Janet raised her chin and gestured to the opposite side. Economy's that way, ma'am, she said flatly. Ayana paused, surprised but not rattled. She offered a gentle nod, her voice calm. I'm in first class, she said, holding out her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed clearly. Janet didn't even look at it. Her hands stayed glued to her hip, her lips pursed into something resembling a smirk. First class is for premium ticket holders, she said with slow emphasis, as if Ayana had misunderstood English itself. You'll need to move to the general boarding line. For the briefest moment, the air seemed to shift. Marcus Hill stood up slowly behind her. 2 other Nova Biomex executives, Layla Jennings, head of legal, and Theo Dawson, director of R&D, exchanged glances from a few feet away. Ayana didn't flinch. She didn't look back. She simply lifted her hand and, with the faintest downward motion of her fingers, signaled to her team, stand by. Then she turned her full attention to Janet and said, with a kind of composed firmness that only true authority brings, maybe you should take a moment and read my ticket. Janet hesitated. The smirk wavered. But the damage was already done. What she had just dismissed wasn't a passenger. It was the very storm she would soon be caught in. Janet finally reached out to take Ayana's phone, not out of curiosity or correction, but out of reflex, like a cashier checking a price she still assumed was wrong. She looked at the screen. Seat 1A. First class. Passenger. Dr. Ayana Brooks. For a beat, her lips parted, as if the truth on the screen had short-circuited her assumptions. Then, just as quickly, her face shut down. No apology. No acknowledgement. Only a tight nod and a forced half-smile. My mistake. It's been a hectic day, she muttered, handing back the phone like it burned her fingers. Ayana accepted it wordlessly. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. Her silence wasn't passive. It was louder than any outburst could have been. She simply looked Janet in the eye, with a steady calm that felt surgical, controlled, measured. Behind her, Marcus watched closely, but didn't move. Layla and Theo stayed still. No one needed to jump in. They'd all seen this before. Ayana had taught them what strength looked like, not in reaction, but in restraint. Because Ayana knew something Janet didn't. Janet thought she had won a small skirmish in the name of procedure. She thought she had reminded someone of their place. But Ayana didn't play by those rules. She rewrote them. And in that moment, she decided that this flight, this airline, would not carry her team. They would not arrive in Tokyo on the wings of prejudice. They would not allow the success of their mission to be tainted by a moment like this. Her breathing stayed even, her expression unreadable. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her Nova Biomex-issued tablet, and tapped open a secure operations app. Her fingers moved with surgical precision. 3 swipes, 2 taps, 1 confirmation. Janet had turned back to her scanner, blissfully unaware. Until Ayana looked up and spoke, her voice low but unshakable. Your mistake was not the boarding pass. Janet blinked. Excuse me. Ayana stepped aside from the boarding lane and added softly. It was thinking I needed to prove anything to you at all. She turned. Not toward the gate, but away. And just like that, the line stopped. Not because of a delay. Not because of an airline glitch. But because Ayana Brooks was about to make a silent move that would speak louder than any word she could ever say. Ayana moved a few steps away from the boarding lane, just enough to separate herself from the crowd. She set her carry-on down beside her with a quiet grace that somehow drew more attention than any raised voice ever could. She was calm, collected, but her presence now carried a sharper weight, like the tension in the air right before a thunderstorm. Janet had returned to her desk, still under the impression that the situation was handled, that everything was back in order. It wasn't. Ayana tapped open a secure app on her Nova Biomex tablet, an encrypted command interface designed for internal logistics and executive operations. It was not public. It was not flashy. It was for moments exactly like this. She selected a contact group labeled Executive Travel Ops. There were only 3 recipients: Marcus Hill, Layla Jennings, and a 4th, Noah Reyes, her chief of logistics, who was stationed back in the company's San Diego command center. Her message was brief, clear, and final. Abort Flight 198. Pull all Nova personnel. Activate Backup Protocol Echo. Charter Private. Tokyo arrival within 24 hours mandatory. Full contingency. Notify Yamanaka. She paused for only half a second, then pressed send. No dramatic flourish. No lingering stare. She didn't need to watch the impact. She already knew what was about to happen. Across the terminal, Marcus felt the vibration on his smartwatch and looked down. Layla's phone lit up simultaneously. Within seconds, both stood and began moving, not with panic, but with purpose. Heads turned as Nova Biomex team members began standing, gathering their belongings. There were no raised voices. No questions. Just a smooth, coordinated exodus. Passengers in the terminal turned to watch. Confused. Curious. Whispering. Are they leaving? What's going on? But the Nova team didn't break stride. It was as if they'd rehearsed this moment. Because in a way, they had. Ayana didn't need to yell to make a statement. She didn't need to cause a scene. All she needed was a message. 15 words and 1 decision, and the cost to the airline would be instant and enormous. 51st and business class seats. Gone. Estimated revenue loss? Over $100,000. Janet still hadn't looked up. And by the time she did, the seats weren't just empty. They were erased from the airline's manifest, and replaced by a ripple that was only just beginning. The departure board still flashed Flight 198 to Tokyo. Boarding in progress. But the priority lane was now empty, and the buzz of conversation in the terminal had shifted into something else. A quiet, growing murmur of confusion. Janet finally looked up, puzzled by the sudden change in atmosphere. Where had the passengers gone? Moments ago, she had seen a dozen or more business-class travelers lined up behind that woman. Now, the space was clear. Too clear. Her eyes scanned the seating area. And then she saw it, the Nova Biomex team moving away from the gate like a single organism, calm but purposeful. Dozens of suits, tablet cases, coordinated badges. Gone. Just like that. Janet's confusion morphed into something closer to dread. A voice crackled over her headset. It was Eric from Operations. "Hey, Gate 64, I've got a flag on mass seat cancellations for Flight 198. Are you guys having system issues?" Janet didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Marcus Hill approached the counter, composed but unreadable. He handed her his boarding pass, now irrelevant. "We'll be withdrawing from this flight," he said, voice smooth but firm. "All Nova Biomex personnel have been rerouted." Janet blinked. I don't understand. What happened?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Within seconds, the duty manager arrived. A tall man in a blazer that didn't quite fit, eyes already narrowed. His name badge read Malcolm Stern, LAX Terminal Operations. "What's going on here?" he demanded, eyeing the empty lane, the retreating group, and Janet's frozen stance. "Why are 50 high-revenue passengers walking away?" Janet opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Malcolm turned to the younger gate agent, who had been silent the entire time. "Did they say why?" The agent cleared his throat. "It was an incident. One of our staff may have misjudged a passenger." Malcolm's eyes landed back on Janet. His tone dropped. "Did you look at her boarding pass?" Eventually," Janet said. "But." "No buts," he snapped. "That was Dr. Ayana Brooks, CEO of Nova Biomex. You just lost one of the most valuable corporate accounts we have." Janet's mouth went dry. In the distance, Ayana walked with her team toward the exit, each step a silent statement. Behind her, the fallout had only begun. A flight might still take off that day, but the cost would stay grounded for a long, long time. By the time Ayana and her team reached the private car service waiting outside Terminal 6, the first waves were already hitting the internet. A college student named Devin Rhodes had been sitting just across from the gate, earbuds in, tablet on his lap. He had watched the entire incident unfold, how Ayana was dismissed, how she stood her ground, how 50 professionals packed up and left like it was rehearsed. He didn't film it, out of respect. But he documented it, word for word, in a single, thoughtful post. "Just witnessed something powerful," he wrote. A black woman in a tailored suit was told she didn't belong in first class. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She tapped her phone, and within minutes, the entire team she led canceled their flight and walked away. Turns out she's Dr. Ayana Brooks, CEO of Nova Biomex. That flight. A six-figure loss for the airline. Leadership isn't noise, it's conviction. He hit post. And everything changed. By the time Ayana's car reached the private terminal where a backup charter was already being arranged, Devin's post had gone viral. Thousands of shares in under an hour. Screenshots spread across Instagram and TikTok. Influencers reposted with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack, while business leaders added #NovaStandard in support of Ayana's actions. News blogs picked it up within the hour. CEO cancels flight after racial profiling incident at LAX. Corporate giant walks out, airline left scrambling. It wasn't rage-fueled. It wasn't loud. It was deliberate, and that made it more powerful. The silence, the calm, the coordination, it resonated. People didn't just admire Ayana. They wanted to work for her. They wanted their kids to learn from her. And for the airline, the optics were a disaster. Internally, panicked emails and emergency Zoom calls were firing off. Externally, their social feeds were flooded with backlash. Do better. Fire the gate agent. This is why representation matters. But the internet doesn't wait for investigations. It moves on impact. And the impact of Ayana's silent gesture was now echoing across the globe. At the headquarters of Sky Aero Corporation in Chicago, a sleek 40-story tower of glass and silence, The executive floor was supposed to be in celebration mode. The company was less than 2 weeks away from announcing its IPO, and internal projections were strong. Analysts were predicting a $9 billion valuation. The boardroom was filled with polished shoes, tailored suits, and confident forecasts. Until a phone buzzed. Then, another. And another. Within minutes, the celebratory tone vanished. The viral post about Ayana Brooks and the LAX incident had reached the top of their trending alerts. But what triggered full-blown panic wasn't the story itself, it was the name attached to it. Nova Biomex. Skyarrow's CEO, Raymond Maddox, stood frozen as he read the name on his tablet. His chief legal officer looked pale. His head of global strategy quietly put down her pen. Because Nova Biomex wasn't just a high-profile biotech company. They were the centerpiece of Skyarrow's newest and most delicate logistics partnership, Project Ascension. That project was a 10-year, exclusive agreement to transport highly sensitive, temperature-controlled medical cargo, prototypes of next-gen microbial therapies developed by Nova Biomex, across North America, Europe, and Asia. It was worth over $1.2 billion. And it hinged entirely on one thing: trust. Ayana Brooks had chosen Skyarrow's logistics division as her global transport partner after months of negotiation. Her standards were intense. Her contract included performance clauses so strict, even the onboarding process required executive-level oversight. Losing her confidence wasn't just a public relations problem, it was a structural threat. "She hasn't responded to our outreach," one VP said. "We've tried 3 direct contacts." Silence. "She's not going to respond," the SEAL muttered, rubbing his temple. "Not until she's ready to talk. And when she does, it won't be to negotiate. It'll be to sever ties." Maddox stood slowly. "Find the gate agent. Find the manager. I want names. I want timelines. And I want a response drafted by legal and reviewed by comms in the next 30 minutes. "But sir," someone said quietly, "what if she already made up her mind?" Maddox turned, voice low and sharp. "Then you better pray she didn't. Because if we lose that contract, we're not just dealing with media fallout. We're staring down a $1 billion hole in our foundation." The room fell silent. At LAX, Ayana Brooks had quietly walked away from a flight. But at Skyarrow, the entire empire she touched was beginning to shake. While panic rippled through Skyarrow's boardroom and the internet continued to dissect every angle of the LAX incident, Janet Reynolds sat alone in a sterile office just behind the security corridor at the airport. Her badge had been confiscated. Her lock-in credentials revoked. She had been told, in corporate terms, to wait for further instruction. But she wasn't thinking about her job. Not anymore. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her phone. A calendar notification flashed across the screen, one she'd set weeks ago and nearly forgotten in the chaos of the day. 3:45 p.m. Dr. Callahan, neurology follow-up, Max's file. Max. Her 15-year-old son. Her entire world. He had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's the previous year. A rare form. Aggressive. The doctors were baffled by how quickly his symptoms had progressed. Muscle stiffness, tremors, and now, increasingly, difficulty with speech. Max had been an honor student. He loved computers, robotics, and sketching in the margins of his notebooks. But over the past 6 months, those sketches had turned into scribbles, then slowly disappeared. Janet had fought hard to get him into a new clinical program out of San Diego. She had pinned all her hopes on an experimental therapy that promised something almost too good to believe. Targeted microbial treatments that could slow or even reverse neurological damage. The technology was being hailed as revolutionary. She opened her email and reread the trial acceptance letter. "Your son, Max Reynolds, has been selected as a candidate for our pilot haptic stim therapy program, led by Nova Biomex." The name hit her like a punch to the chest. Nova Biomex. The very company she had dismissed. The one led by the woman she tried to redirect to economy class without even looking at her ticket. Her mind reeled. She thought back to that moment at the gate. The suit. The calm authority. The quiet refusal to fight back in anger. It was her. Janet closed her eyes. In her small act of judgment, she hadn't just insulted a powerful executive. She had spat in the face of the one person who might hold the key to her son's recovery. It wasn't just her job on the line anymore. It was Max. And for the first time all day, Janet didn't feel defensive. She felt terrified. Ayana sat alone in the quiet of her hotel suite in Tokyo, overlooking the lights of Shibuya through a wall of glass. The meeting with the Yamanaka Institute was less than 12 hours away. Everything had been rearranged flawlessly by her logistics team. Her company hadn't missed a step. And yet, her mind wasn't on the deal. On her tablet, an encrypted report had just arrived, an internal debrief from her security and public relations team. It contained the usual post-incident summaries, flight disruption analytics, public sentiment tracking, media response. But buried at the bottom was a brief personal profile, flagged as a note of interest. It was about Janet Reynolds. 22 years at the airline. No prior complaints on record. Single mother. Son, Max Reynolds, age 15. Diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. Janet had recently applied for financial assistance to cover Max's inclusion in a pilot program run by Nova Biomex, the very one Ayana had pioneered. Ayana leaned back slowly in her chair, exhaling in silence. Her eyes drifted to the night sky, blurred with city light and cloud. She had every reason to walk away, to let consequences run their course, to allow Janet to sit in that silence and learn the hard way what prejudice costs. But something inside her resisted. Not for Janet. Not to excuse what happened, but for Max. A child who didn't choose his mother's narrow view of the world. A kid fighting a disease with a future hanging in the balance. Ayana picked up her phone and called her director of medical outreach. "I want Max Reynolds fully covered under our Access Care program," she said calmly. "Travel, housing, treatment, everything." "Yes, ma'am." "Do you want it public?" "No," Ayana replied. "Make it anonymous. No names. No press. If anyone asks, it's part of our standard hardship fund. That's all." She paused, then added, "And make sure he gets the best attending physician on the trial team." Quietly. The call ended. Ayana set the phone down, staring out at the city again. This wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about staying true to what she had built Nova Biomex to be, a company that led with brilliance, but never forgot its humanity. That day, she had walked away from a flight in silence. Tonight, she offered something even more powerful. Grace. The morning sun rose over Tokyo, casting a golden glow across the city's skyline. Inside the Yamanaka Institute, final signatures were inked, hands were shaken, and the Nova Biomex Yamanaka partnership was officially launched. It was a historic deal, one that would ripple through the global medical community for decades. But the real legacy had already begun the moment Ayana Brooks walked away from Gate 64. What happened at LAX wasn't just a story about an airline mistake or a corporate retreat. It was a case study in power, in principle, and in the quiet ways leadership can transform a moment of ignorance into a moment of growth. Ayana didn't fight for validation. She didn't demand apologies or cameras or revenge. She made a choice that echoed louder than any press conference ever could. And that's the lesson. In a world that often confuses volume with strength, Ayana proved that the most powerful voice in the room is sometimes the one that chooses not to yell. The one that doesn't need to prove anything. The one that lets actions, not anger, define the response. Janet Reynolds will never forget that day. Not because of the job she lost, but because of the opportunity her son gained. She may never know that it was Ayana who quietly cleared the path for Max's treatment, who made sure the best doctors would walk alongside him in the fight for his future. And that's exactly how Ayana wanted it. Because true strength isn't interested in being recognized. It's focused on building bridges, not burning them. It's not about teaching someone a lesson, it's about not letting their ignorance dictate your values. So here's the question worth asking yourself. When you're disrespected, misjudged, or sidelined, what kind of leader will you be? The kind who matches energy for energy? Or the kind who moves with purpose, walks in truth, and leaves a trail of quiet impact behind? Ayana Brooks chose the second path. And in doing so, she reminded the world of something rare, that dignity, when paired with discipline, doesn't just make headlines. It makes history. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And if it made you reflect, even for a moment, maybe that's the beginning of your own silent gesture.